Hi, everybody. The internet has asked, and I have delivered. I have with me today the great, the brilliant, the gorgeous Douglas Murray. How you doing, sir?
Very good to be back with you, Gad. It's been far too long.
I know I was actually checking in preparation of our chat. When was the original inaugural time that you came on? You care to venture? Do you have any idea when it was?
I'm worried it might be almost 10 years ago.
That's exactly right. It was in 2016. So
Oh.
probably one of the first places I'm going to ask you to start before I just want to introduce you first is have things changed since the last time? And I hate to say yes towards the worsening of things. But for now, number one bestseller right here on democracies and death cults, and also the author of The War on the West, The Madness of Crowds, The Strange Death of Europe. All right, let's start from the start. October 7th happened. You said, I better put pen to paper, and this beauty came out. Walk us through it.
Well, yes, my first instinct was that I thought that several things were going to happen, and I wanted to go and chronicle with my own eyes, my own experience, uh, as much as I could about what had happened on the 7th of October 2023 when 4,000 Hamas terrorists basically invaded Israel and slaughtered their way through the communities there, the people, young people at a dance party. I had a sense that I think was borne out afterwards to be accurate, that the world was going to pass over what had happened and go straight on to Israel's reaction to what had happened. And you could see that on the 8th when the world's headlines were, world awaits Israeli retaliation, before the stories were out, before the even any of the details really had come out of this unbelievable atrocity where 1,200 people were murdered and another 250 taken hostage. And I know that some people find it don't like the exercise or can't understand the exercise of extrapolating out by numbers, but that's equivalent by numbers of a population in Israel of 9 million and population in America of 330, 40 or so. That's equivalent to about 44,000 Americans being murdered in one day and 10,000 Americans being taken hostage. And you know, I also I wanted to focus on what had happened on the day. I wanted to see Israel's response because I knew, as you knew, that, Israel, just like America couldn't cope, wouldn't tolerate, shouldn't tolerate captives being taken, hostages being taken. So Israel can't. I knew it was going to respond, and I wanted to see the response firsthand. But the other thing that the book is about is really this strange thing that's happened, and perhaps nowhere more so than in your country, Gad, of Canada, where, cities that seemed civilized until relatively recently, like Toronto or Vancouver, suddenly just get shut down on a regular basis by protesters who side not with the young people massacred in the early morning at a dance festival, but on the side of the people who went raping and butchering their way through that dance festival. And that really is the sort of the third thing in the book, which is what the hell has happened here in America, in Canada, in Britain, in the West, in Australia? Why have we got so many people in a fight between a democracy and a death cult like Hamas? Why have we got so many people who support the death cult? So that was my real aim, and I'm very, very pleased at the number of readers who already have absorbed the book and its arguments. It's obviously the greatest thing for any writer is knowing you're being read.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So maybe I'd like to put myself in the shoes of the typical interlocutor who despises Israel, throw those arguments at you and see if this recorded chat can serve as the definitive rebuttal to all of the nonsense. Number one, grossly disproportionate. Sure, they should have retaliated. Any country would have done so. But what they've gone is so beyond the pale that it is clear that Israel is now the culprit. They no longer have morality on their side.
Yeah, I have an open invitation to the people who claim this, which is send me your battle plan for the destruction of Hamas, the killing or capture of all of the Hamas leadership who perpetrated this atrocity and planned it and have been misgoverning the Gaza for 18 years, and send me your plan for the rescuing of the 250 hostages. And if you have a plan that works, that knows how to extract people from a heavily built up, densely populated urban environment in which Hamas has had 18 years to build tunnels, entrench missile systems in every other house, stockpile weaponry everywhere, and booby trap all these buildings throughout the thing. If you do have a plan for that, send it to me and I will make sure that it gets to as many important generals as possible. And I'm sure they'll be thrilled if there's another way. But as it is, I don't know of one Israeli soldier who wants to spend another minute longer in Gaza than they already have done. But they're there because Hamas is still holding the hostages, and Hamas has still got some control of Gaza.
All right. I mean, I'm convinced by the argument, but of course, we will have many commentators in the section that will offer differing opinions. Point number two. Again, I am the Free Palestine representative right now. Douglas Murray conveniently chooses to use October 7th, 2023 as the time as the period where time began or the clock began. But do you not realize that there is nearly 80 years of the systematic genocide and subjugation of the noble, peaceful Palestinian people? Why are you such a bigot that you choose October 7th as your starting point, Douglas?
Well, as it happens, I don't. I actually choose January of 1979 when the Ayatollah Khomeini took the flight from Paris to Tehran and then succeeded in the Islamic Revolution there, from which moment not only have the people of a great civilization, Persia, been subjugated by these fanatical mullahs, but they've colonized not just Iran, but Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, as you know better than anyone. And so, no, I don't. I started in 1979 for that one. As for, and of course, the Iranian Revolutionary Government being the ones who pay for, train, and arm Hamas, Hezbollah, and the other terrorist death cults that try to rampage through the region. So no, I don't start on the in October 2023. I suppose there are people who think, and it's a very interesting tendency that has been teased out by some people's reaction since 7th October 2023 is that there is a certain type of person who thinks of themselves maybe as a noble and principled person who seems to believe that if you that something was done wrong at the origin of the state of Israel in 1948 and that because the Arabs rejected another state and rejected coexistence with the Jewish state, that somehow something happened that was wrong at the beginning, and that that can be litigated now in 2025. And I think that's flat out wrong. As my friend and colleague Natasha Hausdorff said some time ago, if a couple are pregnant, usually it's the woman, of course, doing the hard lifting, and we can say that now. But if a couple are expecting a baby, the woman is pregnant, they might have a discussion about whether to bring the pregnancy to full term. This is an ethical and interesting question of its own about abortion and so on. But once the child is born, let alone when the child is in its 70s, we're no longer talking about abortion, we're talking murder. So the people who think we just have to rectify something that happened in 1948 should know, first of all, that's what they're talking about, and they should be proud of it. They should be proud of the stance they are taking. The second thing is, if they think that the Palestinian people haven't been, the Arabs have not been offered another state again and again and again, and rejected it again and again and again, seeking to annihilate the Jewish state rather than creating another state of their own. If they really think that, then they clearly haven't read any of the books.
Well, and I mean, I discuss this in one of my books where I say, look, history is really the accounting of, which group of folks took which land from whom. I mean, that's all that history is. And so if we were to litigate, go back to whichever time we prefer to go back to, and say, but in 1702 you did this and I did that, then no one could move forward. And I
Oh,
always exactly, and I always present my own personal history. And let me share. I mean, I think you probably know it, but perhaps not. So of course, I grew up in Lebanon. We had to leave Lebanon under imminent threat of execution. Palestinians stole our home. My parents were kidnapped and tortured by Fatah. Many things were badly done to all of us. Uh, my ancestors, just two generations removed, fled from Syria because we were Syrian Jews. My brother-in-law's family left from Alexandria, Egypt, because they were Egyptian Jews. My
oh,
wife's family are Lebanese Armenian. They also had to leave Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War, but they also are the product of the Armenian genocide. And yet we've all been able to integrate that within our tragic personal histories, but move on. I don't hold hatred and genocidal desires to exterminate all Palestinians because of the things that were done to me and my parents by Palestinians. But somehow the Palestinian people can't arrive at that. They are always litigating the past. Is there any
yeah.
hope for us to get them to be as accepting of their history as I was of mine?
Not so long as people teach them that the victimhood mentality and the multi-generational refugee mentality is going to lead them to victory sometime. If, I mean, Hamas ran Gaza for 18 years, they could have brought up a new generation. Of course, they had no intention to because they're Hamas, but they could have educated a new generation of Gazan Palestinians in that time to actually build the state that they'd been given in 2005. They could have created a flourishing society. They could have taught the young to live in peace with their neighbors, and it could all have gone another way. But instead, Hamas were voted in by the Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas decided to go for war after war with their neighbor, and there's a price for starting war after war and losing. But yeah, it could all have gone differently. Could all have gone differently if Arafat and co hadn't have, in the early 1960s, founded the PLO and pretended that all of Israel was occupied. They would have
Unbelievable.
had their state in 1964, in 1967. They couldn't have had it any time.
Indeed. When you went on your visit prior to writing the book, is there anything? I mean, I presume you came with some a priori, conceptions of what you were going to see. Did anything surprise you, either in the positive or negative sense of that term?
Oh yeah, lots of things surprised me. I'd spent plenty of time in the region before, but was there for most of the year after the seventh. Yes, lots of things surprised me. Uh, on the positive, I was surprised by most of all by the extraordinary resilience of the young Israelis in particular, young men and women who joined back up in reserves or who were already serving. I was amazed by the courage of young people who are so like their American and British counterparts, with the one exception that when they were called upon, they fought. And that made a huge impression on me. The negative one that surprised me, I suppose, was that I have been floored in the last 18 months by the lack of compassion or even understanding or empathy that much of the so-called civilized world just has not shown to the victims in Israel.
What do you
The,
think is what do you think is driving this, Douglas?
I think one thing is the level I just described, this thing that Israelis are uniquely undeserving of sympathy, uniquely undeserving of sympathy. That of all of the world's victims, somehow you can treat even a 1-year-old Israeli baby is regarded by much of the world in a lesser light than any other 1-year-old, as if the baby even has done something wrong by being born in a state which is so defamed by the world. I have examples I give in the book, multiple examples, but one that really stood out to me was having spent a lot of time with survivors of the Nova Party and parents of people who were murdered and more. When there was a commemoration memorial of the Nova Party that traveled around a bit of the rest of the world a year after the atrocity, it came among other places to America. It came to LA. It came to New York. And in New York, it was protested by crowds of activists against Israel, chanting for intifada and chanting against the Nova Party. There's a father who lost his daughters at the party, who had to walk through the street in New York through people celebrating the murder of his daughters. This is uh, a level of sickness that, yes, I think is shocking. If if parents of people killed on 9/11 traveled anywhere around the world, or parents of the 49 people killed in the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, or parents of the young women murdered at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester in 2017, if parents of those people went to a civilized city in a place like New York and stumbled upon hundreds of people celebrating the murder of their child, we would say, and they would say, what the hell has gone wrong with us here? But with Israel, it can be different. That has that has surprised me, I have to say, Gad. The normalization of that has been not unexpected, but still shocking.
You know, I would have gone along with what you said in terms of, it's, well, I would have said that it doesn't surprise me that there's so much Jew hatred given what I've seen in my life. But I must admit, in unison with what you said, that I have been taken aback, not so much by the Islamic-based hate, because that one I could have predicted, but I'm astonished at the level of orgiastic depravity that Westerners have in their Jew hating, quote,
Mm.
logic. And so I'll give you an example that's near and dear to your heart because I'm going to refer to the Muslim grooming gangs. And so this is based on a game that I coined 6 Degrees of Jew, which is I give you any calamity in the world and you have up to six causal degrees to explain why it is the Jew that did it. But now you're going to love this one because again, it speaks to a unique reality that happened in Britain with the Asian grooming gangs. By the way, I'm Asian. I'm from Lebanon, and I don't remember Lebanese people doing this, but or certainly Lebanese Jews.
No, and to date, we have no anecdotes even of Japanese males busily raping
That's right.
white girls in England. Yeah.
Apparently, they're not Asian. But anyways, so I will post online, Douglas, an image with the say, let's say the 20 Huddersfield. So this is one of many grooming gangs. So I'm
Yes.
picking the Huddersfield one because that's the one I used. And let me sort of summarize the name of the 20 guys. Muhammad, 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 Muhammad. Take a break, Muhammad, Muhammad, Muhammad. And then I post in my usual satirical way. I'm not smart enough. I don't have a big data analytic brain to be able to link all of these into some unifying rubric. Could somebody help me? I will get a tsunami of replies, Douglas, not satirical, not facetious, saying, yes, asshole, it's the Jews. It's Jews. I say, but how? You mean the Mohammeds are Jews? They said, no. Who led them into Britain? And so there,
Ah,
I created a mathematical equation, Douglas, which might interest you. When three Mohammeds gang rape your daughter, it's really Mordechai that's to blame. So three Mohammeds equals one Mordechai. So how can you fight against this level of departure from decency and logic? Do we have any hope, Douglas?
yes, we do. I think. I think your 6 degrees of separation. I think by now we can probably tighten it, and it's about two, maybe one most of the time. I
Yeah.
see 1 degree of separation being pushed by lots of people that I'm rather surprised by, I have to say. The Jews in terms of number, the minority percentage and visibility in certain fields are almost perfect as a scapegoat for malcontents whose lives are not going well. And instead of realizing their lives are not going well because of themselves, the Jews are the perfect scapegoat. I mean, Girard and others completely persuaded me of the scapegoat theory. And the Jews are almost just desperately, unfortunately, of the size and visibility that means that anyone looking for an explanation for their own failures will be able to blame the Jews. It's a perennial, I'm afraid, historically. But what's interesting to me is that we have in our societies in the West some considerable understanding of Christian anti-Semitism, and we have some considerable understanding of far-right anti-Semitism. We've learned something in recent years. The faster learners have learned something about left-wing anti-Semitism. And we know that it doesn't come wearing jackboots. It comes with a keffir and a COVID-19 mask because the people of that ilk are simultaneously very hot for intifada and terrified of the Delta variant. I think we can all agree. But so we've become sort of knowledgeable about left-wing anti-Semitism too. I think the one that is almost completely absent from an understanding in the West, and in a way, it's like, well, why would most Westerners understand it or need to understand it? Is Islamic anti-Semitism, which, as I say in the book, is its own fuel. It's its own fuel. There is a guy called Mehdi Hassan who used to be in the media in the UK,
Oh,
and
yes, I know who he is.
he said something true about 10 years ago that I quote in the book. It was an unusual occasion, so I thought it was worth bookmarking. He described as a Muslim himself. He wrote in the New Statesman that Islamic anti-Semitism is, quote, routine, rife, and commonplace. And he said every British Muslim reading this will know what I'm talking about. He said every dinner there'll be somebody who starts talking about the Jews doing 9/11 or, and I believe him on that because that's my experience as well. I don't know any Muslim who doesn't acknowledge that Islam has a massive Jew hatred problem. And that doesn't mean that every Muslim has that. But my word, it's there in many Muslims, in much of the Muslim world. And that's again because the Jews are the almost, I mean, not only having rejected Muhammad's teachings very early on, and not only by having a successful state in a region of states that are falling apart or just run by military juntas or royal families and having some oil money and not much else, and not just that, but this central thing that it seems to be intolerable to much of the Muslim world that the Jewish people should be able to fight to defend themselves and to win. It hurts their self-esteem at their core. And that, as I say in the book, among other things, when it comes to Islamic anti-Semitism, as with all other types, it tells us nothing about the Jews. It tells us only about the person who suffers from it. Everything that the Muslim world accuses Jews of is what they're guilty of themselves. And if people could realize this is just projection on a vast scale, it would become much more understandable to a wider number of people.
I loved your explanation just a few minutes ago where you said about sort of the attribution of personal failures, because I have actually developed that exact argument, but using sort of my psychological based knowledge. So let me reframe what you said using some of these psychological principles. So in psychology, we have something called the self-serving bias, whereby you attribute successes internally, right? I did well on the exam because I'm a smart guy and I studied hard, and you attribute failures externally, right? I did poorly on the exam because Professor Saad is an asshole Jew and he's not fair. And I'm Muslim, so that's probably why he gave me a bad grade. Now, that is already an indelible feature of the human mind because it's an ego defensive strategy. I want to protect my ego. Good things are because of me, bad things are because of them. And exactly to your point, The Jew, to use Amy Chua's term, the Yale law professor, she talks about market dominant minorities. Well, the Jew is the ultimate market dominant minority, who, exactly to your point, is minuscule in number, but outlandishly supersized in terms of their influence. Well, now you've got the perfect cocktail to blame the Jew for why I cheated on my wife or my wife cheated on me because the Jew is the pornographer. It's probably
Mm.
the Jew who so that's the 6 degrees of freedom. Why do I have diabetes? It's not because I'm 400 pounds and I eat all this junk food. It's because the Jews are withholding the diabetes drug so that they can manipulate the stock prices of the diabetes pharmaceutical industry. So, and by the way, you said that you've seen it. I lived it every day as a guy growing up in Lebanon. And this is Lebanon tolerant, Paris of the Middle East, Lebanon. So I can't even begin to fathom what it's like in Lahore or in Yemen. And
Yes.
so again, let me ask, because I always like to extract some sort of optimism. Can we find a mind vaccine that eradicates Jew hatred from the heart of mankind, let alone Muslim people?
No, I'm rather uh,
Pessimistic. Oh
I'm
no.
rather pessimistic about that because, as I say, it seems to me to be such a human perennial. Can you shoot down certain things? Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think you can warn decent people away from it. And you can alert the cleverer people not to fall into this self-destructive mind virus. The people he mentioned earlier, but the people who think that mass immigration to Europe is because of Jews. Like there's a woman I mentioned in The Strange Death of Europe, or Barbara or something, I can't remember. It's a totally fringe figure, but she is Jewish and she is on video somewhere saying that
I know
Europe must.
exactly who you're talking about because they always send it to me.
They
Yes.
always send and but it's like she didn't run European post-war migration policy. She's just a person who happens to be Jewish, who happens to have an objectionable viewpoint. Um, but the pretense that everybody who was actually in charge, whether it's Tony Blair, John Major, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Boris Johnson in the UK, or endless Angela Merkel in Germany. These are the people who created post-war Europe. I mean, they're much longer list, but these are some of the people who created Europe's post-war migration disaster. And you struggle to find a Jew among them.
Oh, I got one. I got it
Go
for
ahead.
you. Clearly, you haven't mastered your 6 degrees of Jew game yet.
Oh,
George Soros
George
is an
Soros.
acolyte of Karl Popper,
Yes.
and he promoted the notion of the open society. George
Yes.
Soros is the billionaire who serves as the background puppeteer to all of the non-Jewish leaders that you mentioned. Aha, it is the Jewish fault. The Jews'
Yes,
fault.
I did actually go into that in Strange Death of Europe. I have a considerable distaste for George Soros's philanthropy, but it's like it's the lowest resolution type of thinking, and one of the reasons why I don't, and I explained in that book why I came to the conclusions I did after many years of study of what was going on with post-war European migration. But the reason why I say that this is probably a perennial of the human heart is that it'll these conspiracy claims will always be available to people lacking in curiosity and intelligence who wish to find someone else to blame for their own failings. And I don't think there's going to be a time when we as a species get cleverer or more decent or less malleable by fools. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Now, I think we both have been two of the people who have been most recurringly standing on top of the mountain, screaming and warning people. Do you feel, never mind when you and I last spoke, in the last 15 years that you might have been involved in trying to, warn people about this, Do you feel that people are waking up and hence might engage in some reasonable autocorrection? Let's say, Mike, as you mentioned, immigration, or, and here's where I'm going to share my pessimism. I feel that no amount of evidence that the West sees is ever going to cause them to autocorrect. Please tell me I'm wrong, Douglas.
I think it's country by country, Gad. I mean, America has a pretty impressive autocorrect system. American politics, as we've seen in recent years, has a much more adept capability to react to public dissatisfaction with things. I mean, you know, the southern border crisis happens in the US. Biden oversees a disastrously lax immigration policy where millions of illegal migrants head into the US, and the US votes in Donald Trump, who's saying on the campaign trail, "This is something I'm going to fix." And already he hasn't got everybody who's illegal out, but he's stopped crossings at the southern border to like one person or so in the last few weeks. Um, by contrast, some other countries seem to be extremely bad at course correction. The country you're in, Canada, it seems that there is a capability or capacity. I hope this isn't the case, but just swap out a leader of the left and continue to make the same mistakes and not ever concede to it. So who knows? I love Canada. I've got some great Canadian friends. I'm not very positive about that. Pretty negative about my own country of birth, Great Britain, because again, doesn't seem to matter whether you vote Conservative or Labour, you still get the mass migration. The British public voted for Brexit to lower immigration, among other things, and a Conservative government oversaw a record number of net migration figures during their time. And now it's Labour, and nothing gets better. And they can't even seem to stop boats of illegal migrants like landing every day. But there are some success stories. There's one that I have kept an eye on, which is Denmark. Okay, it's only a country of about 5 million people, but they had an early warning to some of the problems of bringing extremists into your country with the cartoon crisis, which I can never quite believe we all had to go through and still are. And now a left-wing government in Denmark has actually brought migration to a sensible level, and left-wing government is actually doing the things that any sensible government would do. So it's some countries can correct. It's just it will be on a country by country basis, and it'll depend on, of course, whether or not there are decent, good politicians who hold firm and do what's needed, and it'll depend or not, and it'll depend on whether publics have the wisdom to vote for politicians who don't just give them bromides, but actually solve the problems that the country needs to address.
Yeah, I worry though. So yes, of course, the United States is in better shape than some of the certainly Western European countries. But as you probably know, Douglas, Islamic leaders have for many, many years said that we are going to conquer the West in three ways. Number one, through the womb of our women, and certainly they're doing that. And it certainly doesn't help that most Western countries don't even meet the fertility rate of, the replacement rate of 2.17. Number two, we're going to conquer the West through hijra. Hijra is the Arabic word for immigration. And number three, perhaps most importantly, we are going to conquer the West by using your miserable freedoms against you. So now, even in a place like the United States, Dearborn now exists. Little
Yeah.
Mogadishu's in Minneapolis exists. So inshallah, wait enough time. Maybe it'll take 500 years for the United States to become Malmo. But once the patterns start, they're irreversible unless you create a cataclysmic autocorrection. Do you think that anyone has that? I mean, I'm asking you to extrapolate into the future, but do you think some leader will come along? Donald Trump is going to be done in a few years, but who will say, Islam and the West are incompatible. No more Islam in this land.
Well, there have already been political leaders who've said pretty much that, and some of them have been very successful at the polls. Although they couldn't form a coalition to agree on him being the prime minister, Geert Wilders, who has said that and much more in the Netherlands, has got the largest number of seats in the Dutch parliament. Um, I think that it's perfectly possible that people will say that. Um, what are you going to do about it is the big unanswerable follow-on question. What are you going to do about it without losing your own um, sense of self and indeed morality? I mean, I can and have foreseen terrible responses to this. And it's always been my view that the longer you leave it, the worse in the end it's going
Exactly.
to be.
Exactly right.
Uh, but nobody addresses a problem early in politics if they can avoid it. They put it
Well,
off for their successors.
and I
They
was,
put it,
and I'm sorry,
another generation.
forgive me for interrupting. To our earlier point about there are some things that are an inherent part of the architecture of the human mind. I also think that most people are only willing to face a problem when it, I mean, literally bites them in the behind,
Yes.
right?
Well, look at the response of the British government after the Southport killings. Um, this appalling young man stabs three girls under the age of 10 at a Taylor Swift dance party, turns out to have had Al Qaeda manuals. Um, the media runs with, angelic schoolboy from Wales, and and then like and then the government covers up much of it as far as one can see and doesn't allow information out that they already know. Very angry people come out onto the streets of a very ordinary British city. Southport is not London. It's like if this can happen in Southport, it can happen anywhere. And the reaction of the authorities is let's get the general public.
Amazing.
I and I've just seen that like you have far too many times in different iterations. And every time I just think, oh God, please don't do it. You're going to make it worse.
Yeah, I mean, I pick up and whenever I've seen, either read something of yours or seen you on some show, I think we share a similarity in terms of our stupefied indignation, if you'd like. Like we can't believe that people think
Yes,
this, right? And
yes.
and so maybe I didn't plan on doing this.
Stupefied indignation. That should be the title of our joint memoir.
Exactly. I'm in. Sign me up. So this leads me to a segue, which I asked you off air if we could discuss it, and you were gracious enough to say yes. When you appeared recently on Joe Rogan, I think that came across. I mean, you were not happy and you were not going to have it. And I listened. So I was driving with my family. I was I was delivering a lecture in Ottawa, which is about a 2 hour drive from Montreal. And my entire family was with me, and that episode had dropped. So we listened to about the first 45 minutes, where I mean, the main gist of your point is, why do you bring these idiots who are spouting all kinds of nonsense? And so I put out a clip, and feel free to completely disagree with me here, although I suspect you might not. It was a very, very gentle critique. I can be quite spicy, but I have
Critique of me or of Joe.
no, it was me. So let me summarize what it was. I start off with Douglas Murray's coming on my show. I'm a huge fan of his work. We probably agree on 100% on all points. I couldn't imagine a better ally. I might have chosen a different stylistic choice in how I tackled Joe. I am appearing on his show. I might not want to sort of, although your moral indignation is perfectly justified, just the stylistic choice is one where you might lose some people that you otherwise want on your side because you made that. That was the entirety of my criticism of Douglas Murray. Otherwise, 100% on board with him. I think I got more hate from Jews because I dared to make that criticism because their logic was Douglas Murray is a friend of the Jews. Your buddy Joe Rogan is inviting all these assholes. You're a fraud, Gatsad. Number one, to dare to say something negative of how Douglas comported himself. And number two, why aren't you publicly disassociating yourself from Joe Rogan because he is the new Himmler? I thought that was wrong. Am I wrong in thinking that that was wrong, Douglas?
There's quite a lot in that, Gad. I didn't see your video. Everybody always, I mean, it's like post-match analysis of any kind. Like everybody thinks they know how they would kick the winning ball, but in the end, it's you on the pitch, and it's as useful having people online saying, I would have done it like this, as it is, I imagine, for a Premier League footballer to be on the pitch and hearing people from the from the stands shouting, "Kick it." Um, I was obviously trying to do several things there. I thought that the fact that Joe would only have somebody with my views on if he had the protection of his comic buddy was surprising.
Right.
I thought that it's surprising not least because just a week before he'd given this guy Dave free reign again on his show. And that's obviously Joe's right. He can have whoever he wants on his show, but it's strange that, he doesn't have to have somebody like that accompanied by a sort of babysitter, and that I must have a debate with the sort of two-on-one debate. I thought that was, I mean, I've been in plenty of skewed environments where, the whole thing is tilted deliberately against the position that I take, but you know, you you have to do what you think's right. And I thought that I had to say, I think it was incumbent that somebody did say to Joe, I mean, well, first of all, to debate this comedian who's now appointed himself a Middle East expert. And well, that's its own story, I suppose. But I thought that somebody had to say to Joe that he's doing something different here. He's doing something different. It's not just asking questions at some point. If you're inviting on complete frauds and hucksters who are pretending to be knowledgeable about areas and in fact are pumping unbelievable sewage into the minds of listeners. And I don't think that's a it's Joe can do what he wants, obviously, and will, just as you can or anyone else. But I can't not say that that is what has been going on. Like, just because we have had a period in which gatekeeping has become a problem and people use it as a problem does not mean you lift every sluice in the sewers of your society and let the shit just flow. And I'm afraid that's what I think is being done when people invite on completely unfunny comedians to talk about serious things and mislead people and then say, oh, well, I'm just a comedian. And I think that's exactly what you're doing when you're inviting his pseudo historians on who then say, I'm not a historian, but don't demur when somebody introduces them as a historian. They just say they're not a historian when they're caught out on not knowing what they're talking about. And uh, I had to say this, Gad, because somebody had to say this. So many people owe their celebrity or whatever to going on Joe Rogan's podcast or being invited to his comedy stage. But um, I just, I offered him a critique of what he's doing, and he can either, I suppose, accept what I think was friendly criticism, or he can double down. And I would love it if he accepted the friendly criticism and actually invited on people who could clean up some of the slurry that some of his previous guests have pumped around. And yeah, I mean, when you do these things, everybody has a view. But
Do you think so? And again, people are going to accuse me of trying to be too charitable to Joe because he's a friend and so on. But I'm really hypothesizing this with an open spirit. I think that Joe is the type of guy who is very inquisitive, perhaps at times to a fault when he is being inquisitive about hearing positions by people that are perfectly idiotic positions, to your point. But it comes from a mindset of hey, let's talk about whether there is evidence that Bigfoot exists. Let's talk about whether in New Mexico they have aliens that have landed. He has that slash curiosity, slash slightly conspiratorial mindset. So could it be that all of these imbeciles that he's invited, Churchill is really the evil guy, not Hitler, Israel are the evil. Could it simply be coming from that reflex of, I just invite anybody who's got something interesting to say? Or are you suggesting, and again, I'm open to either positions that you might espouse, or are you suggesting that Joe has a nefarious agenda in inviting these folks?
I don't know. I don't like to create windows into people's souls. But I would just say that I think you can tell quite a significant amount from two things. One, if somebody went on Joe's podcast and talked about MMA fighting and turned out they had never been to a fight and they had actually got no understanding of the basic rules of MMA, Joe would notice and would not bring that person on again to talk about MMA. And I suspect his horseshit detector, which is pretty acute normally, would ring fairly early, and said person would be called out on the podcast for not knowing what they're talking about. So if that is the case with MMA or any other thing that is one of Joe's passions, why not when it comes to, for instance, the war in Ukraine or the war in Israel? Why not? Why not say, look, this is, if MMA is complicated, this is a lot more complicated. And maybe to understand this complicated thing, I should at least get a variety of people on and not just rely on self styled comedians who are self taught would be, know-alls about something. I think that is very telling. I think that if you have somebody on who believes that Hitler is the bad guy in the 20th century, sorry, that if you
Churchill.
have somebody on who believes that Churchill is the bad guy in the 20th century, maybe you should have someone on who knows about Winston Churchill and believes that, on balance, Churchill, good thing. I mean, some of this gets very serious. It's not important what a couple of comedians shit talk about each other about MMA or probably about any number of other things. It is when you are vastly misinforming your viewers. And the second thing I would say about that, if I may, is there seems to be some kind of confusion about what is being what is what's I mean I don't absorb this slurry, but I have friends who keep me vaguely informed about bits of it. There seems to be some kind of confusion online about my appeal to credentials or credentialism or expertise. And it's worth clearing that up because I said repeatedly during that podcast, during that 3 hours talking with these two or having to debate these two, I said repeatedly, anyone can say whatever they want. I'm not trying to stop anyone speaking. Good Lord, as if I could. You think I could shut up a bunch of comedians in Austin, Texas? But what I did say was that, again, just because experts have got things wrong many times does not mean that expertise does not exist. And that obviously is very clear where it exists, or it should be relatively clear in, for instance, STEM. We all recognize it exists in medicine. If you, Gad, were being wheeled into the operating theater to have heart surgery and comic Dave Smith popped doing the surgery today. Is that all right with you, Gad Sad? I think you'd say, actually, I'm not sure that your reading of a few Wikipedia articles and what you've heard from doctors is going to get us through. Okay, those are clear ones. Those ones are clear ones. But when it comes to journalistic standards, I notice that something else is happening. Joe could have acknowledged in the aftermath of that that a person like me, who has put in the work, who has done the field work, done the groundwork, and written a book which I don't think Joe has yet had the courtesy to read, but which shows in considerable detail, I'd say, um, the what is a first-hand account of a conflict. I think that there should be a basic realization that in journalism, it is a norm to actually go to a place and report. And that is seen as being a good thing. It isn't to be laughed about or derided. And it isn't to be seen as being on the same level as somebody who has taught themselves by reading Wikipedia and anything that confirms their own biases. And I am, frankly, when you come to the question of is this good faith or not, which is effectively what you're asking, is I would say yes, right up until the moment that Joe and any of his friends and circle think that basic standards of journalism, like actually being in the place you're writing about, is to be derided, and amateur hour conspiracy theory junk is to be lauded. That would be the time when it would fall apart. The media has plenty of problems. It has got plenty of things wrong. But there are basic standards in journalism that that people are meant to abide by. And I, at any rate, don't think that they're laughable. I don't think it's ridiculous. And I think that Joe and his circle of friends will reveal a lot about themselves and their intent as on whether or not they find, for instance, uh, a first-hand account of a war, like on democracies and death cults, to be something they contend with, or whether they pat themselves or their mates on the back hilariously for not knowing anything.
Well, I hope that you two, I don't know if the bridges have been burned, but your voice
Not
is
on my end. I never close the door entirely, and
well, that's good to hear. So I was going to ask you, you haven't reached out to him or vice versa, not to turn this into a gossip session, but because I think that I did notice there was a clip that came out, I think a couple of days ago, where I think you're referring to it, where I guess he was with a comedian where they're sort of making fun of you didn't go there kind of routine. That can, of course, come across as a personal slight. Or again, not to be charitable, I know that he spent about 20 minutes with Bill Burr a few years ago making fun of my name and all kinds of stuff. It could just be good old-fashioned comedian ribbing. And the reason why I'm trying to
yeah.
take a charitable, uh, you know, processing of the situation is because I know that Joe does unbelievable stuff and he brings on unbelievable people such as yourself. And to now have that opportunity broken, everybody would lose because we need to have your voice there. By the way, it's for the same reason that I told people, well, I went on Joe's show and defended Israel. Should I disassociate from Joe? How would that benefit the battle of ideas? So I hope that you guys resolve it.
Look, I agree. I have no beef with Joe, but I would like to know that he has actually taken what I write in this book seriously. Like, I'm not pissing around. I don't think this is funny. I don't think that the world is a studio in Texas and we just riff endlessly and things don't have much meaning. Um, I don't think it's a game. I don't think it's something to be litigated by comedians. Much as I love and have many comedian friends, I don't think they are able to solve many problems in the world. I think they can have a good time. But I don't think that the war I'm describing and have seen close up is about their amusement factor or their tolerance for bullshit or their desire to um, spark debate about weird things they haven't really looked into or just just riff. It's like I don't think the world's as funny as all that. I don't think it's as meaningless and as nihilistic as all that. I think there are things that very much matter, and if they matter, then you put in the work. And if you don't want to put in the work yourself, you at least listen to people who have. And if your job is to host, and if your job is to spark debate and so on, then get other voices on and don't have a babysitter. Like, have people who know about Hamas and the Islamic Revolutionary Government and Hezbollah and what they've done, and have people talking about the actual war from different perspectives. It's not like there's any lack of amazing experts and first-hand accounts or survivors or amazing people or soldiers or anyone else who could correct all of this slurry of misinformation. There are thousands of people I could point Joe and others to myself who could counter the one-sided rhetoric and who ought to be on and heard. Young women, young men of every imaginable background, and heroic people, actual heroes, not ringside heroes. And until such a time as I see the part of the orbit of that actually listening to the variety of voices they ought to listen to, and not just occasionally having somebody like me on babysat in a two-on-one contest. I'm My mind is not yet made up.
Fair enough. Stay on the line. We're going to wrap up with the last question, but I want people to remember to go pick up this beauty right here. It's already at number one, but let's keep it at number one for a longer period. Are there any projects that you're currently working on that you would like to take this opportunity, notwithstanding that you're now promoting this book, that we might expect from Douglas Murray to come down the pipeline?
You know very well, Gad, Sad, that's a state secret. I couldn't possibly, I couldn't possibly let you in on such high grade intel. No, I'm focusing on this book. This has been a real uh, labor to do this book. I wrote it was from notebooks in Israel, in Lebanon, in Gaza, first-hand reporting and accounting and a lot of testimony for me and others. And really, as a friend was saying to me yesterday, it's really also a meditation on the nature of evil, because I believe that the nature of the evil that Hamas perpetrated on the 7th has made me and should make others to think about that. We've lost the theological terms in which we can talk about it, perhaps, but it's yes, in other ways, it's also a book about evil. It's not just about war and peace, which is enough, but about good and evil, and about heroism and human decency and kindness in the face of unimaginable odds. So it's been my honor to write it and to spend the last 18 months with the remarkable people who've inspired it.
Well, thank you for writing it. And please promise that it won't be another 9 years before you return on the show. I will be, by the way, in London, first week of June. I'll be speaking at an event in London and then at another event at University of Buckingham. I hope that we'll have a chance to meet in person for the first time.
I'd love that.
That'll be
I saw to
fantastic.
miss you in Canada the other month, but we will find a city to be in together at some point, Gad.
I can't wait. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Thank you so much for coming on and thank you for your courage. Cheers.
Thank you.